Hi, hello, and welcome back to Everso. I'm Ever, and today I will be reading The Clairvoyant Boy by Melly Mayhem on AO3, and I'll be reading chapter 24, 25, and 26. Chapter 24, The Ghost of Solidarity. Hitoshi was not the happiest with the new dorm arrangement. Sure, he was overjoyed that he finally had a place in the hero course, but the requirement of living in a dorm was not as exciting. He would have much preferred to stay with his dads in the teacher's dorm, but apparently that wasn't allowed because of the unfairness or something. The only perks Hitoshi had, due to his parents being staff, was the bounce of boredom that came with arriving a day early. He thought the nepotism was supposed to be cool. And the worst part was, everyone in the class was already buddy-buddy with each other, and it would make settling in 10 times more awkward, especially considering Izuku wasn't in the class with him. Hitoshi was still slightly bitter that the boy had denied his ticket into the hero course, leaving Hitoshi to be the only person in their year to transfer. But another side of Hitoshi could see that Izuku didn't really want to become a hero, and begrudgingly respected that. The only good thing about being in dorms was that Hitoshi would be able to see Izuku all the time now. Well, most of the time. While students were allowed to mingle with others in different classes, there was a curfew commanding all students to be in their respective dorms by 10 p.m. sharp. But considering his parents were not only the guardians of 1A, but also 1C, Hitoshi may be able to use nepotism to his advantage. Nonetheless, that was future Hitoshi's problem. Present Hitoshi's problem was the gaggle of new classmates that had barged their way through the height allowance doors and right into Hitoshi's face. "Hi there!" an almost obnoxiously pink girl greeted. "My name's Ashido Mina, but you can just call me Mina. What about you?" Shinso Hitoshi? His response sounded more like a question. "Cool, I'm Kaminari Denki. This is Kirishima Eijiro, Sarah Henta, and the spiky, angry-looking guy is Bakugo Gatsuki." The humanoid version of Pikachu responded, not at all put off by Hitoshi's awkwardness. Everyone mentioned waving, excluding one ferocious-looking Bakugo Gatsuki. Not that Hitoshi really cared. He didn't want to talk to the temperamental blonde anyways. "Hello." Hitoshi hid his hands in the pockets of his jeans, hoping to conceal the river of sweat he could feel emerging from his palms. He really didn't want to make a fool of himself. The risk of another class leaving him to spend the year alone was much too high. He also didn't trust himself to say anything more, lest he say something strange or taboo. "You're the guy that's going to be joining a class, right? Because you placed first in the sports festival, right?" Mina asked, her head slightly tilting. Hitoshi swears he can hear a faint "so manly" coming from the artificial red hand. A small nod is all it takes for the group eyes to practically light up. Hitoshi doesn't even need to say anything. "That's so cool," Kaminari says. "We actually really want to ask you about your quirk. Do you need that railgun in order to use it, or is it just direct to like a prismatic speaker?" The boy is practically vibrating with how excited he looks. It reminds Hitoshi how Izuku also gets when asked about quirks. Maybe they would be friends. Should Hitoshi introduce them? Thinking back to Kaminari's question, Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. He tries to come up with a decent response, considering he had no idea what the blonde was saying. But all he could manage was a baffled "What?" Kaminari blinks in surprise. "You know your laser quirk? And the ray gun you use to control it?" An enormous weight is somehow pushed into Hitoshi's shoulders. Not the blonde's question, now having caused severe inner turmoil in Hitoshi. Thousands of different possibilities swirled through his head, and not one of them was positive. The reason the 1A students were so friendly was because they didn't know Hitoshi's quirk. Hitoshi had thought they already knew, considering he used it on live television on one of their classmates. So unless Bakugo just hadn't told them, which was possible considering the teen's fragile ego, Hitoshi was right to assume that they would know. But it seemed that Class 1A was filled with idiots. Idiots that would shun Hitoshi as soon as they figured out about his aura quirk, his villainous quirk. Selling his fate, Hitoshi licked his lips nervously before speaking. I don't have a laser quirk. That was just a support item me and my friend made. This seemed to stun the group, but they were quick to recover. This time it was Zero who spoke. So then, what's your actual quirk? Is it whatever you did to make Bakugo walk out of the ring? Zero's hand came up to rest on his chin. Hitoshi took a deep breath. Yeah, my actual quirk is brainwashing, and that's why I didn't pass the entrance exam. It's not very useful against robots. He attempted to joke, hoping it would lessen the blow of when they would start to become wary of Hitoshi. However, instead of the glares of disgust Hitoshi had predicted, the group just all looked like a light bulb had gone off inside their small brains. Oh, that makes so much sense, dude! Kirishima chirped, his hands flying into the air briefly. We were wondering why Bakugo just walked out of the ring, but he wouldn't answer any of those questions when we asked. Mina nodded essentially. Yeah, we ended up assuming that you just said something really mean and hurt his feelings, so he just chickened out, but I guess that's only half true. She teased in a whisper shout. Hey! Bakugo shouts from the kitchen, the distant sound of small explosions echo in the background. I heard that, Raccoon Eyes! I know! Mina laughs, scampering upstairs to avoid the fuming students. Bakugo is quick to give chase, leaving Kaminari, Kirishima, Zero, and stunned Hitoshi behind. While everyone watches the two disappear, Hitoshi just stands. He doesn't know if the pure shock he's feeling can be seen on his face, but he doesn't have the capacity to care. Not a single member of Class 1A that had heard Hitoshi had reacted negatively. They all just kinda didn't care. Like Izuku. It obviously wasn't the same with Izuku, as he actually understood what Hitoshi had dealt with, but they were still surprisingly empathetic. Like they didn't care if he could control all their minds. They just believed he wouldn't do it. It was extremely overwhelming for Hitoshi, so he did what any sensible person would do in this situation. I gotta go. He jabbed a thumb towards the huge double doors, and without waiting for a response, speed-walked out of the dorm. Muffled through the now-closed door, Hitoshi could hear Mina's aspirated whine of, "Where did Shinso go?" Hitoshi couldn't be bothered to return, instead making a beeline for where he knew the Class 1C dorms were. He needed to talk to Izuku. Everything was too much and overwhelming for him to deal with all by himself. When he reached 1C's dorm building, he didn't bother knocking, instead just making his way through the doors. The few people gathered in the common room looked up at the sound of someone entering, but upon seeing Hitoshi, they quickly went back to whatever they were doing. He passed by where Hisashi was helping organize dishes in the kitchen. When the man spotted him, he smiled and held up 3 fingers, likely the number for the floor Izuku was on. Hitoshi nodded in thanks and made his way towards the elevator, much too lazy to take the stairs. He didn't have to wait long before he was on the third floor, and by proxy, Izuku's room. He could hear a light chatter inside, but it was quick to cease when he knocked on the door. It was probably just Izuku muttering to himself again, so he wasn't worried about interrupting an important conversation. As Hitoshi suspected, when Izuku swung open the door, no one else was there. The room was also surprisingly bare. Hitoshi had expected much more hero merch to be owned by the #1 hero nerd. However, the only merch inside was a few posters placed strategically on the wall. "Hitoshi!" Izuku's chipper greeting distracted him from the boring room, instead putting his focus onto his best friend. "What are you doing here? I thought you were supposed to be meeting all of the hero students. Did it go bad? Oh my goodness, Hitoshi, I'm so sorry." Hitoshi cut off Izuku's rambling by lifting a hand, doing his best not to let anything be revealed through his gaze. "The opposite, actually," Hitoshi explained. "They were all really nice and didn't give a rat's ass about my quirk. It was just really overwhelming." Eyes sparkling, Izuku pulled Hitoshi into his room and shut the door. "That's great! Tell me all about it! Did you get any fondant quirks? I've been dying to know how gyros work. I met her on the first days, and she seemed pretty cool, but I didn't want to ask her in more detail how a quirk works, because that's how we get over a wall and stuff, and yeah." Hitoshi waits for Izuku to finish his spiel instead of cutting him off. He knows that the younger boy was often picked on for his rambling, so he didn't want to give off the vibe that he hated it as well. "I didn't really talk to her, but I can let you know once I know more. I can even maybe try ask her if you want," Hitachi offered, his voice rising in pitch at the end of the sentence. "You would really do that for me?" Izuku asked, his hands grabbing onto Hitoshi's in excitement. Hitoshi's brain stopped momentarily. It seems that today was just a roller coaster of reeling experiences for Hitoshi, because as of now, Midori Izuku was holding his hand. Midoriya, I hate physical contact, Izuku was holding his hand, and it wasn't involuntary. Not wanting to discourage the trust Izuku was placing in them, Hitoshi just nodded and grinned. "Yeah, I'll get it for you. In fact, you probably could just visit the 1A dorms and ask the questions yourself." At that, Izuku falters, and Hitoshi worries he's done something terribly wrong. However, Izuku's hands don't move from when they're clasped around Hitoshi's, so that helps with the anxiety he's feeling. "I am not sure. Bakugo's in the class, and he really hates my guts. He wouldn't hesitate to tell everyone I'm quirkless, and I know how they reacted well to your quirk, but I don't have one at all. They might totally hate me, and they might hate you just because you're associated with me, and I would hate for me to be the reason the whole class hates you." Izuku nervously rambles, a genuine worry present in his emerald eyes. Hitoshi shrugs. "I wouldn't care. You're my best friend. If they don't like you because you can't spit acid out of your fingers and can command a giant shadow monster or can control someone's brain and force them to do whatever you want, then I don't want to be friends with them either." Still, obviously nervous, Izuku looked to a point beside Hitoshi. When the third boy shifted his own head to look at whatever Izuku had focused on, there was nothing there. "But," Izuku started with his hands now leaving Hitoshi's to ring together uncomfortably. This time, Hitoshi had no qualms about cutting Izuku off, knowing that the next part of his sentence would be just self-deprecating. You know your friend Monoma from your first A class that you keep talking to me about? Izuku raised an eyebrow, obviously confused by the sudden mention of his third aid partner. Yeah? What about him? If it was revealed that he absolutely hates people with villainous quirks, then would you still want to hang out with him? Hitoshi asked, putting air quotes around the word villainous. Izuku blinked before his eyes widened fractionally. Mono would never think that! He actually grew up facing quite a fair amount of discrimination for his quirk, so I hardly doubt that he would have any sort of prejudice towards quirks. Hitoshi cinched and pinched his brow. Okay, well, that is great. It wasn't what I meant at all. So, what you would do if Monoma hated me because of my quirk, maybe even treated me unfairly for it? I wouldn't be friends with him, Izuku answered easily. I don't want to associate myself with someone with that kind of view. Smiling, Hitoshi raised his eyebrows until the light bulb clicks inside of Izuku's head. Oh, the smaller boy says, making the connection to what he had just said and what Hitoshi had been talking about earlier. It's entirely up to you if we hang out at the 1A dorms, Hitoshi informs. He knew bits and pieces about Izuku's past with Bakugo. He wouldn't want to force his friend into an uncomfortable situation. But if we do, I'll have you back, no matter what goes down. Izuku smiles. It isn't a huge thing, with his teeth on display, but rather a softer, more genuine smile. Thanks, Toshi. Hitoshi is weak against the urge to embrace his friend, so he opens up his arms and leans into a hug, giving Izuku ample time and warning to back away, so he chooses. But, to Hitoshi's shock, Izuku is just as quick to wrap his own arms around Hitoshi's back, holding him in a surprisingly strong squeeze. The two friends may stay there for a moment, before pulling away to look into each other's eyes. Neither of them comment on the shine residing due to unshed tears in the other's eyes. Anyway, Izuku finally popped out after a moment in awkward silence. You said you would tell me something about what happened? Oh, yeah. Hitoshi pulled Izuku so they could sit down together, disregarding the chair in order to sit on the carpeted floor. He doesn't falter when telling Izuku about his strange interaction with 1A. Izuku was having a really hard time getting out to do his vigilante work. He was in a dorm room with very heavy security. Getting out without being noticed would be nearly impossible, but he was still going to try. He had a reputation to uphold, and he worries that crime rates will spike if the local delinquents know he's gone. So, here Izuku finds himself, dressed head to toe in black, the visitor's pass he had asked Oboro to snag in his pocket. Izuku wasn't stupid. He knew that escaping and re-entering a UA undetected would be no easy task. So he had prepped an insane plan that had an insane amount of backup plans. He had an idea for almost everything that could go wrong, including an excuse for if he failed entirely. The visitor's pass hidden snugly in his pocket would allow him to enter and exit via the gate without being locked in or out. He didn't use his own pass as he knew that the principal would likely be alerted, which is the same reason why he doesn't use a random student's pass. One thing he does know, due to Oboro accidental spying, is that all the teachers have a spare visitor pass in case they lose their own. If Izuku times his departure and arrival for when another member of the staff goes out to patrol, then he'll be able to sneak past the gate under the guise of an extra visitor pass said teacher has. Izuku also knew Eraserhead's entire schedule, which was the teacher he was planning to use to sneak out. It was the best option, considering Oboro had his entire patrol route memorized. Izuku also made sure to nab Eraser's visitor pass specifically, for fear they were each unique. As for not being spotted, Izuku was dressed head to toe in black. The only thing not hidden by the dark fabrics were his eyes, which he would dull under the cover of midnight. However, his mask was currently stored in his pocket, just in case he ran into somebody on the way out. Oboro had asked to fiddle with the cameras right as Izuku would pass them, which the ghost had happily agreed to. It would keep Izuku off of Nezu's camera, therefore preventing the rats from identifying Izuku through the figure alone. They agreed to do it until Izuku found a good zone free of cameras, so Nezu couldn't track him via the glitching either. He also had loads of alternate methods, but he didn't have the time to recite them. Eraserhead was scheduled to leave in 20 minutes. If Izuku left now, he would reach the gate with 5 minutes to spare. But he gave himself some extra time, knowing he probably was going to have to avoid someone at least once, most likely one of his classmates. Ready to put his plan into motion, Izuku slips out of his room. He could go on via his balcony, but on the off chance he got injured, he wouldn't know how to explain away the injury without sounding suspicious. So yeah, leading through the front door it is. He creeps down the hallway and towards the elevator, Oboro at his side. Neither of them speak, except for Oboro giving a "all clear" before they turn every corner. When they get to the elevator, Oboro quickly makes his way towards the main floor, before returning to the third and confirming that no one is loitering in the common room or the kitchen. Izuku takes the elevator down to the first floor, his foot anxiously tapping at the wood, making up the flooring. The doors open to prove Oboro truthful, as there isn't a single soul residing on the main floor. Izuku briskly makes his way over to the doors, exiting slowly while facing the building so that he doesn't actually slam the thing and wake up his classmates. When the door is finally closed, almost silently, may he add, Izuku allows himself a sigh of relief, which is quickly dissipated by the call of his name coming from behind him. Izuku squeaks and spins around, revealing a very confused Yamada-sensei. The man isn't in his usual getup, instead sporting a grey "Put Your Hands Up" radio t-shirt and bring pink sweats pants that Oboro happily informs belong to Shoda. He also sporting a half-up, half-down hairdo, a pale comparison to the usual extravagant hairstyle on the man. "Midoriya, what are you doing out there?" the man asks, his hands curling around his steaming mug of what Izuku assumes is tea. "Oh!" Izuku falters, trying to remember his pre-planned excuse in his panic. "I was just going for a late-night run. It helps me wind down before bed." Izuku flashes the man a weak smile, hoping that he bought the excuse. He's left stressing as Brother Mike shifts his weight onto his other foot. Izuku face palms beside him, which doesn't ensure Izuku's confidence in his lie. Yamada-sensei stops him briefly. "Midoriya, you do know that curfew is at 10. It is currently 11:15. You can't go on a run right now." He takes a sip of his drink. Yeah, I know, it's just that he fiddles with his fingers trying to come up with something. This is when I usually go when I'm staying at home. I just kind of forgot that it wouldn't be allowed. Yamada-sensei smiles. Yeah, I get it, kiddo. Here, I'll walk you back into your room. Izuku goes to protest his patrol at the front of his mind, but he's quick to falter when Oboro shakes his head. Both teens know he would surely be caught if he attempted to continue his patrol now. So instead, he just agrees, letting his homeroom teacher lead him back to his room on the 3rd floor. They don't talk as much as they make their way up, but the silence isn't awkward by any means. Yamada-sensei bids Izuku a good night when they make it to the door, waiting till the boy is securely in his room before making his way to his own. Izuku sighs. Oboro has the look of understanding written across his face. He should probably wait a few days before trying again. Maybe give him and Oboro some time to learn everyone's schedules. Oboro bid him a good night as Izuku pulled out his computer. Unlike the caged Izuku, Oboro was free to move however he liked and was going to spend his night telling Eraserhead. If there was one thing Oboro couldn't miss out on, it was the nice nighttime patrols he liked to go on, accompanying whoever he could. The ghost also hated watching Izuku do computer work, which was fair enough. Izuku sighed again before opening his computer. He wouldn't give up his work that easily, he thought to himself as he pulled up the newest email from Tsukuyoshi. Chapter 25. The Ghost of Young Love. Izuku was having regrets of last night. He had stayed far too late solving cases for Tsukuyoshi via computer, getting a measly 4 hours of sleep. Meaning he was walking into the UA building completely exhausted. It was probably due to the lack of midnight exercise, which he had gotten quite used to. When his usual activity was stripped from him, it made him restless. It also seemed that Oboro wasn't reading the room very well, as he was as chipper as ever. In fact, it almost seemed as the ghost had more energy, which was probably because he hadn't needed to use any energy in order to become tangible like he did during their escapades. However, it seemed Oboro wasn't energetic enough to let Izuku know he was going to move in the opposite direction of his class when he was supposed to be. Sure, it wasn't the ghost's fault that Izuku couldn't tell his lefts from the rights in his exhausted state, but whatever happened to bros supporting bros? At first I thought it might have been another friendly ghost, because this guy was kind of smiling at this tether, but then I tried to talk to him and realized he was watching her and made a terrible financial mistake. He also called her some pretty explicit things I don't really want to repeat, so that was the best. Oboro was floating beside Izuku, telling him about some of his escapades in an attempt to find more friendly ghosts. It didn't sound like it was going too well. Izuku nodded along to Oboro's story. He was too tired to make any comments regarding it, but he was still listening. However, Oboro's false hope at finding more friendly ghosts had brought his mood down. He really did want to believe Oboro could find some ghost buddies, but Izuku had been also communicating with Jet for a while and knew that this was extremely unlikely. Why don't you try hanging out with Mrs. Shimura and the others? They seem very nice ghosts, and there's 7 of them. I don't see why you need to find more, Izuku suggests, attempting to push his friend's interest onto something else. The ghost just frowned. As much as I love Mrs. Shimura, I don't know if we can entirely trust her. She knows a lot about the boogeyman of the underworld, or whatever you call him, and she's hiding things from us. Besides, meeting other ghosts would give us a great opportunity to... Oboro stops talking right before Izuku crashes into a warm body. Fortunately, he isn't sent flying this time, instead just stumbling back a few steps to look up to the person he had just crashed into. Whoa there! Slow down, kiddo. You okay? Midnight said from her position in front of Izuku, the smell of her strong perfume assaulting his nose. Yeah, I'm all good, Izuku stutters, as he smoothed out this wrinkly mess that had been made of his tie. I'm so sorry about that. I wasn't looking where I was going. Midnight laughs good naturally. Yeah, I could see that. Keep your chin up next time, okay? Izuku nodded, and then immediately blushed with embarrassment when she winked at him. The teacher waved as she stepped around Izuku and down the hallway. The annoying and only familiar smell of the perfume left with her. When trying to continue his conversation with the ghost, Izuku noticed Oboro staring at Midnight as she stuttered down the hallway. His gaze didn't break until she turned the corner and by proxy moved out of sight. For a moment, Izuku thought he might subconsciously float around the woman, but luckily the ghost feet stood rooted on the ground. Oboro? Izuku asked, waving a hand in the teen's face. You good? The ghost blinked hard before turning his gaze toward Izuku. Huh? Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm fine, the ghost said, trailing a finger through his wispy hair. That was admittedly strange, considering Oboro only really did that when he was feeling a little bit down. It was one of those habits Izuku had recognized in the early stages of their friendship. It was something he didn't like to call him out on, because people were usually uncomfortable with Izuku whenever he could read them like a book. Although Oboro seemed to be playing with his hair a lot nowadays, especially whenever they were in Izuku's dorm room. It didn't make sense to Izuku at all. His room felt more homey ever since they started lighting the candle Eraser had gotten him. The smell was always really... Something clicked in Izuku's head so fast his train of thoughts was cut off immediately. He knew why Midnight's perfume smelled so familiar. It was because he had been lighting a candle with an almost exact smell for the past 2 weeks. It wasn't the dorm that put those feelings of anguish into Oboro. It was the smell. The candle must have reminded him of Midnight, which was probably meant that him and her were... Were you and Midnight-sensei friends when you were alive? Izuku asked, which caused the ghost's head to snap towards him at the neck-breaking speed. Izuku automatically took a step back, knowing there was a possibility Oboro would yell at him for being creepy, just like the kids in his middle school used to do. I just noticed that she's pretty close with your friends, and that you look kinda down whenever I light the candle, and her perfume is the exact same scent as the candle, and I know you sometimes get upset when talking around Eraser and Yamada says it, so I just can assume that will be the same thing. Izuku knew he was rambling at this point, but to him, he was nervous and honestly just looking for a way to explain himself without seeming super creepy. He would have kept going if Oboro didn't cut him off by wiping his eyes and putting his hands up in a placating gesture. Whoa, hold there, Izuku. You don't really have to rush to explain yourself. The ghost took a slow step towards him. Izuku did not move back. I was just kind of shocked is all. Sometimes I forget you're kind of some genius. Oboro finishes with a weak laugh. Izuku's hands move to rest on his chest. Oboro continued. Yeah, me and Emery are friends. Oh, Emery is Midnight's first name, for FYI. Oboro added with a snap. Izuku nodded along. We met in my second year. She was an upperclassman that took in a kitten I had rescued. Still, she had the thing to this day. Oboro pauses at this, rubbing at the back of his neck while a blush spreads over his cheeks. We actually dated for a bit too, but I don't think the relationship is official anymore considering this. Oboro vaguely gestured to his body, specifically highlighting his feet that were now hovering inches above the ground. I just miss her sometimes. It's harder for me to talk about nowadays, considering what I lost. Even with his general shock at the circumstance, Izuku tries his best to be empathetic. His hand is quick to find the ghost's shoulder, and it gives a supporting squeeze. I'm sorry. I can't imagine how that would suck. Craning his head back slightly, Oboro offers a soft smile. Thanks. It's a lot better now that I have a friend to talk about all of this. I really appreciate it. Izuku offers his own soft smile. Oboro returns the gesture with a much brighter one. Unfortunately, the wholesome moment is cut off by the long running of the bell, which startles Izuku so badly he physically jumps. Oboro throws his head back and laughs, which has Izuku huffing and sticking his tongue out at the ghost. That is, until Oboro's laugh stops, as he levered Izuku with a panicked look. The words, "You're late to class," it's all it takes before Izuku is sprinting through the hallways, a laughing ghost trailing behind him. The clicking of a mouse echoed through the dorm room, every once in a while accompanied by a long groan. Honestly, Oboro was getting a little sick of it. The noise was caused by Izuku, who was sitting at his computer and clicking to refresh every 30 seconds. Ever since Hisashi had caught him trying to sneak out, Izuku had been doing his usual work via his computer. However, Tsukuyoshi had soon run out of cases that the boy could take, considering that 1. Izuku couldn't leave campus without explicit permission from his teacher, and 2. He didn't have enough clearance for any cases of higher level. Oboro sat on Izuku's bed. The teen had taken the desk and fiddled with his fingers. He was also bored out of his mind. Neither Shota or Hisashi were on patrol, which left Oboro with nothing entertaining to supervise. After an hour of watching Izuku mope over his computer, Oboro was contemplating if he should start messing with any students unfortunate enough to be awake. Just as the ghost was starting to get up, Izuku started repeatedly lifting his head from where it rested on the desk, just to let it fall right back to where it had been sitting. Now the room was filled with the sounds of Izuku's head hitting the desk, rather than the mouse clicking. Remembering he was still technically a teenager and could therefore act like it, Oboro threw himself backwards to lie on his back before covering his face with his hands and groaning. I'm so bored. Honestly, Izuku, you should just get the clearance so that maybe we could have something to do. Oboro lightly joked, knowing Izuku wouldn't be able to do that. Except the joke flew right over Izuku's head as the boy started explaining in rapid detail what he needed to do in order to get more clearance. This included the entire hierarchy of the police force, which really didn't help with Oboro's growing boredom. It wasn't until Izuku said. Or you could just fast track it and get a hero license, but that's impossible if you don't go to a hero school or have a hero sponsor. That, Oboro finally put in some input. Then just get a hero license. You'll be cracking big cases in no time. Izuku's brows furrowed. Were you even listening to me? You have to be sponsored, which I don't have, or go to a hero school, which I don't. Izuku cut himself off as he came to a realization. Wait a second, Izuku said as he began rapidly typing on his open laptop, leaving his empty inbox behind. From his spot on the bed, Oboro could see Izuku searching up laws regarding the provisional licensing exams. When he found what he wanted, Izuku let a small, high-pitched laugh before turning to Oboro. There is a loophole, he explained, turning around in his chair. It says hero school, not hero course. I could take the licensing exam, no sponsor needed. That would give me the clearance for bigger cases and provide safety net if we ever get caught while interrogating people or even talking them down. Oboro sat up, putting his arms behind him for support. That would actually work very well. I was just starting to get worried that you may get into some legal trouble. He paused briefly. When's the next exam? I'll check, Izuku said before turning back to his computer. He was typing for a second before he turned back around to face Oboro again. It's in 3 weeks. Oboro's eyes widened minutely. That's pretty soon, actually. Do you think you'll be ready for an exam like that? I mean, I don't doubt your fighting skills, but usually people team up with their classmates and stuff. You won't have anyone to fall back on, unless, of course, you team up with people there. Actually, now that I think about it, there's probably the people who failed the exam the first time around that need teammates. Unlike most teenagers making an important decision, Izuku actually took a minute to think about his skill level and ability to pass. After a moment, he responded, I think I would have a good chance. You're right about teaming up with people, and I should be allowed to bring support gear as long as I file it correctly. Besides, the worst case scenario, I can just rely on you, right? Oboro could feel his face light up. Oh, yeah, I totally forgot that was a variable here. Of course I will help you. But back to the support gear. Do you have all the gear you would want, or are you going to have to speedrun making something? If you don't have to make the gear yourself, you could always ask Katsume for some help. From what I overheard, she's really good with support gear, and you got to witness that real time during the festival. I already have a lot of stuff, but it wouldn't hurt to bring more. This test would give me some pretty high clearance, so I could start doing bigger cases, Izuku noted, pulling out a notebook from his shelf. It seemed like he was already planning on what he would bring. As the words Izuku had just spewed processed in Nobara's brain, an idea started to settle. It was something that made him hesitate, both the pros and cons of bringing up his developing proposal being weighed out in his head. On one hand, asking Izuku to do this for him would probably bring a lot of progress. It would also give Oboro some closure, as well as provide a stronger protection for UA as a whole. But, on the other hand, it was quite dangerous asking something like this of Izuku. The boy could very well get it over his head and do something reckless. Hell, he could even end up dead if too terrible of decisions were made. Izuku sketched quietly, unaware of Oboro's inner dilemma. Oboro bit at his lip. It would be bleeding if Oboro could still do that. But, finally, he came to a decision. Oboro cleared his throat and quickly gained the attention of the living teen. Izuku. Oboro leveled him with the most serious but non-threatening gaze he could, wanting to get his point across without words alone. I am going to ask you to do something for me, but I need you to promise that you'll be smart and responsible about it and not do anything that could possibly risk your life. Got it? Eyebrows furrowed. Izuku tilted his head. Sure, yeah, I can do that. But what's it about? Oboro took a deep breath. There is this case I want you to request to be put on, but only after you've gotten your license, though. They won't give you the clearance otherwise. Okay. What case? Izuku asked, his hands folding in his lap. The knot in his throat only grew louder as he swallowed. I want you, Oboro started, trying to calm his racing heart, to be put on the case for the League of Villains. Chapter 26. The Ghost of Lying on Paperwork. Izuku didn't spend a lot of time in the common room. It was much too noisy, and the hustle and bustle of the classmates never stopped. He also felt he was almost always being stared at. In terms of popularity, Izuku was at the bottom of his classmate pyramid. That was no surprise, considering where Izuku was in middle school food chain. What was a surprise was the fact that his lack of popularity had nothing to do with his quirkless status. Other than the boys that had been quickly expelled, nobody in his class were aware of his quirk status. Izuku had never told them, and the boys had been expelled far too quickly to get the rumor to stick. Sure, there may be a few classmates who suspected, but Izuku was certain that none of them based their opinion off of him solely based off conspiracy. In fact, Izuku was under the belief that his classmates simply didn't like him for his personality. He honestly couldn't blame them. Excluding Shinzo, Izuku didn't talk to anyone in his class unless absolutely necessary. His middle school habits probably didn't help him much when it came to coming out of his shell. Izuku was also kind of strange. There was 1 or 2 times where his classmates had spotted him talking to Oboro, which to them obviously looked like he was losing his marbles. He had also had a pretty horrible staring problem when it came to analyzing his classmates. Even if it was accidental, staring at the mutation of his classmates could easily come across as a disdain for mutant quirks, which probably didn't give him a positive reputation. So, of course, his fellow peers didn't see him in a very good light, leading to the current issue at hand. Whenever Izuku was in the common room, there was always eyes on him. Whenever it was a classmate sending him a pitying look, someone attempting to figure out how he ticked, or just someone curious about why he didn't talk to anyone else, there was always at least one person staring. It was honestly starting to freak Izuku out. He already didn't like social interaction, and it was not making it any easier. The worst part was, Oboro wasn't even able to provide his usual support, as the ghost was off doing who knows what. Izuku suppressed a sigh as he closed his computer. He leaned back slightly to drag his hands down his face, taking a moment to breathe through his frustrations. Sakuchi still had been pretty stingy with the cases he gave out, claiming that there weren't any more he could give out without knowing Izuku had the proper certification. It really sucked, knowing since Izuku didn't have certification, it would likely be a while before he could get it. So, Izuku had been bored out of his mind, not to mention the restlessness that would not leave him. Trying to ignore the girls staring at him from the kitchen, Izuku stood up, tucked his computer under his arm. He was just about to make his way back to his room when the front doors burst open. Entering the building was none other than Class 1C's homeroom teacher, Yamada-sensei. Although it appeared it was a much more muted-down version of the man, as his usually spiky hair was now softly cascading down the man's back. The teacher had also changed from his hero gear into a pair of sweatpants and a shirt from a band Izuku didn't recognize. The other students didn't seem startled by the man. After spending such a prolonged time with the man, the class had grown desensitized to their teacher's energy. Yamada-sensei took a few steps into the room and towards the stairs before he noticed Izuku also going that direction, which he promptly stopped to beam at the boy. "Just who I was looking for!" There was a snap, and a pair of finger guns pointed towards Izuku. "I almost went straight past you and towards your room. Glad to see you out in common room for once." From anyone else, Yamada-sensei's words would have come out as condescending, but the man said them with so much gusto that Izuku couldn't see it that way. The bright smile taking up half of the teacher's face likely played a part in that. Lowering his voice a little, Yamada-sensei sobered up. "Would you mind taking me outside for a moment? I just want to ask you some questions about your forms without sharing all your personal information for the class." Izuku immediately felt anxiety grab at his heart. Without Oboro with him to reassure him that he was fine and likely overreacting, there was no way for that anxiety to diminish. Despite the horrible pit in his chest, Izuku nodded. Yamada-sensei's smile somewhat widened, and the man began making his way out the door. Izuku would hold on his tail, doing his very best to ignore the curious stares of his peers. The relief of not being looked at was quickly stomped out by the cool air that hit Izuku's cheeks as soon as he stepped outside. The man did not stop at the entrance, instead making his way over to the bench sitting a few meters away. The two sat down without a word, shifting their bodies to be facing one another. Yamada-sensei cleared his throat. "Hey, listener, just want to get out that you aren't in any trouble. All I need is to make sure some of your forms are correct, you dig?" Swallowing around the knot in his throat, Izuku nodded. "Rocking!" He pulled a few folded sheets of paper from his back pocket. Izuku couldn't read it under the horrible lamppost lighting, but it was safe to assume that these were the forms his teacher was talking about. "I just wanted to double-check that your forms are all correct," he said, unfolding a set of papers. "There is something about your school papers that should be on your dorm papers." Izuku could feel himself freeze up. Right. He definitely had some things on his dorm forms. Usually, Izuku would be smarter than that. Knowing changes in forms had a high chance of being spotted, especially with Principal Nezu managing the paperwork. However, not changing the forms was just further unconvincing. You see, due to his earlier school records, Izuku was forced to put his schizophrenia medication into his UA forms, or else this cone was bound to get suspicious, which is something Izuku couldn't risk. If they found out he did not live with his mother, Izuku would likely be forced to go back to her, which was less than ideal. So, claiming he took his medication was just easier. It wasn't like the school kept tabs on if he actually took it. But then the dorms had been introduced. The policy on medication was that they were kept in recovery girl's office, where there wasn't worry of them being lost or stolen, which meant that recovery girl would be keeping tabs on who was taking the meds and when. Izuku couldn't actually take his medication, as he didn't actually have schizophrenia. If recovery girl didn't see him coming in to take his meds, she would no doubt report him to someone, making a home visit much more likely. So, Izuku had chosen not to fill out any medication forms. It was the safest option for him and wouldn't stir anything if the stand didn't look too closely. Except he attended UA high school. Of course, they would double-check their paperwork. Just what was Izuku thinking? Oh, really? My mom must have missed something, Izuku said nervously. He had to fight to keep the anxiety out of his tone. What needs to be fixed? Any chance of the form issue being something small that Izuku had missed was swept out the window when Yamada-sensei spoke up. Just an issue with your medication forms. Your medication wasn't listed and recovering girl never received anything. Oh, yeah. Izuku decided to take a risk. My mom didn't include that on purpose. I've been self-administrating my medication for years, and neither of us saw any point in handing over to a recovery girl. I'm responsible with it, I swear. I just didn't want to lose the independence I have, you know? The warm smile that enveloped the hero's face was comforting to Izuku. The words, when he spoke, were not. Hey, listener, I get that, but unfortunately, rules are rules, and they are here for a reason. As much as I trust you with your meds, I don't necessarily believe that other students wouldn't try and nab them from you. Someone could get seriously sick. And didn't Izuku know it? He'd been ill because of his meds many times before. That's the sole reason he had stopped taking them, despite doctors suggesting the opposite. The side effects were also a huge factor on why he wasn't able to escape the psych ward quicker than he did. It was hard to hatch a complete escape plan when you could even get out of bed. Unfortunately, Izuku couldn't really find an out to it. The only thing he could think of was telling his teacher the truth, which he wasn't planning on doing anytime soon. I'm visiting my mother this weekend. He was actually just going back to his apartment, but President Mike didn't need to know that. I can get her to fix that then. Izuku felt a huge weight being lifted off his shoulders when President Mike gave him a firm nod. Yeah, that works. We can just substitute them with your school forms until you hand those other ones in. You dig? I dig. Izuku lied through his teeth. He didn't actually want to do this, but he couldn't think of any other solution. Yamada-sensei flashed 2 thumbs up at him before standing up and slipping the papers back into his pocket. Well, kiddo, that's all I needed from you. Just bring those meds to the homeroom tomorrow, and you can give them to me then. You can head over to Recovery Girl's office later in the evening, and she'll get you situated. You won't have to tell me when you're leaving, but make sure you're just going there and back. No dallying. Izuku offered a half-hearted smile and stood up as well, beginning to make his way back to the room. The pro didn't begin making his way to his own dorm until he saw that Izuku had made it back inside. Grabbing his computer from where he had left it on the coffee table, Izuku had begun to make his way to his bedroom. He was too jumpy to stay in the common room where the eyes of his classmates would no doubt be on him. It's fine, Izuku tried to rationalize. Getting sick from this medication isn't all that common. He'll be fine. Without Oboro with him, Izuku had no one to reassure him that he would indeed be okay, although if the ghost was with him, they'd probably be lecturing on how neglecting he was with being with his health, and as well as trying to convince him to tell Yamada-sensei about his quirk, which was not happening. After getting ready, Izuku fruitlessly laid down on his bed. A deep sigh echoed throughout the empty room. He wouldn't be getting any sleep for a while. The room was getting smaller. It had been about a week since Izuku had started taking his medication, and every day since his room had gotten increasingly smaller. When he had gotten back to his dorms after hours of classes he just couldn't seem to focus on, Izuku found the room to be too small. Izuku had voiced this to Oboro, who was staring at him with a face displaying nothing but concern. The ghost had refused to leave Izuku's side all day, the same look he wore now that had been on his face all day. Izuku, are you sure you're okay? Oboro hovered over him, but refraining from touching. The room feels the same to me. I think you might be running a fever. The ghost's hand moved to his forehead, but pulled away when Izuku shivered. I know you don't want to, but I'm getting really worried about you. Izuku just shivered again, pulling his blanket up his shoulders. His throat burned and his eyes drooped with exhaustion. Each time he blinked, his eyes seemed to stay closed for longer. He was only a few minutes from falling asleep. Izuku? Hey, please, can you just get some help? Oboro begged. Izuku wanted to respond, but all he could manage was a tired grunt. Oboro's face came into view. Izuku could barely make out his face with all the blurriness flickering across his vision. His eyes drifted shut again. He couldn't muster the energy to open them back up. Izuku? He could feel Oboro shaking him. Izuku? Open your eyes. Oboro's voice was getting further and further away, but Izuku couldn't find it in him to care. He took a deep breath, falling asleep to cold hands shaking him and muffled yelling. And that's it for now, because that's all the chapters they are as of the 23rd of June 2026. So yeah, that's quite a cliffhanger even for me. Oh wow. But yeah, it's a bit of a longer episode, this one, because I didn't want to leave out the last chapter because it is very short. Like, it has like 10 minutes and I didn't want to do an episode with 10 minutes, or I didn't want to wait for the next chapter to come out, because I think the chapter like this should be read immediately. Also, yeah, I will be waiting for the updates, because I don't know when Marley is going to update. I don't know, but I am hoping soon. I'm really hoping soon, but you never know. So in the meantime, I will be reading some, of course, My Hero Academia fics. If you have any suggestions, let me know. Also, I am going to try to maybe do one fic from Percy Jackson. If you're interested in that's coming soon, probably. And yeah. Oh, and if you've been following from the last video, then I made the exams, which yay to me! And that is all, and thank you for listening, and have a great day or night, and bye bye.